Hi there, and welcome back to the Social Contract Research Network channel. Now, if you're familiar with this channel, you'll probably know that we usually take quite a philosophical take on the ideas that we discuss. The social contract and ideas like the natural contract we'll usually go at through picking apart the philosophy of Michel Serres in some detail. But it's also incredibly important to see how these ideas can translate into action, how they can cause organization and public debate, and even how they can influence policy. And that's why I'm incredibly excited today to be able to welcome our guest, Andrew Lacenere, who's the CEO and co-founder of Albatross Designs, an environmentally friendly shaving products company, and also the brains behind a new website, naturalcontract.com. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Great to be here.
So, Andrew, last week, an email lands in my inbox alerting me to the fact that there's a new website out there called naturalcontract.com. So obviously, as someone who's done a lot of work on the natural contract and someone who's passionate about the idea and deeply into the thought of Michel Serres, I'm intrigued. I go along and I find out that this website is being designed and put out there by a shaving products company based in San Francisco, California. So my first question to you has got to be, how did you go from selling shaving products to launching a website called naturalcontract.com?
Yeah, and it's a very good question. So, I think at the heart of what I want Albatross Designs to be is a sustainable design company. So we started with shaving products because for me, it was a perfect first product. It wasn't too complicated. B, the shavers we sell work really well and they're affordable and they're plastic free. So that was a great first product, but we were always trying to make, other more complicated products and essentially design for a sustainable future. And so I've had this idea about the natural contract in my head since I was an undergrad at McGill University, and I first read Michel Serres' book. And at some point, we just said, why don't we give it a go and just create this forum where people can come together and talk about ideas relevant to what I envision would be included on a natural contract. So we just kind of did that. This is some of the designs we envision will hopefully make us money. This one is not about money. I do hope one day maybe it'll be run like a Wikipedia of sorts, where you have a vast volunteer network and keep the platform going. But the underpinnings of a natural contract, I think, are so important that we just wanted to give it our best to start pushing this idea out there. And that's why it's so great to hear from you and other like-minded people who understand the value of such a contract.
I'm so excited to connect with you. I think as someone who's always working on the theoretical side of things, it's just so exciting to see someone really trying to put this into action. You took us back a moment there to your undergraduate days at McGill and said that you read Michel Serres' Natural Contract. I'd be intrigued to know a little bit more about your story, how you got into the environmentally friendly shaving business, whether Michel Serres was key for that, just your journey from being a fresh-faced undergraduate at McGill to launching this website.
Totally. Yeah, so when I was at McGill, I was focusing on environmental economics and only minored in philosophy, unfortunately, and the rest of my degree was filled with business classes. But it was really the kind of sustainability side of economics that intrigued me. And when I graduated, I first thought I'd probably be working at a solar power company or something like this. And then I graduated in 2011, and at the time it was the worst job market since 1929. And I ended up trying to turn a research project I did on alternative currencies into a business. And so started this idea of an alternative currency, and this was before Bitcoin, but we had this idea of an environmental currency. So just like any other money, but it could only be spent on things that qualified as sustainable. And my goal is to essentially flood the sustainable economy with money that help it reach economies of scale and all this. Well, it was a cool thing, but when Bitcoin did come around, it kind of stole all the attention, and all the investors I talked to said, well, we're interested in Bitcoin, but not this. So that was okay. I was actually kind of vindicated, because so many people, you say, we're starting our own type of money. They say, what are you talking about? So at least some alternative currency came to be. And then after that, though, I think the thing is, when a business fails, especially when it's your first business, it's you're really tired and you have no money. And so I had moved to San Francisco a little before then and jumped into the sailing world, which has always been a passion of mine. I just love being on the ocean. And so spent a few years in the sailing world, fixing boats, racing boats, delivering boats. And at some point, I started to think about, what do I really want to do going forward? And I knew it was in sustainable design. And then I said, what if I make a company where that's what we do? We design products that create solutions for issues that, the environment faces. So at the time, it was a no-brainer for me to think about the razor. It was, people, planet, profit. There's a little of all the things I needed for a first product. And we started with that. And then have, since looked at other products. But again, this natural contract had always been in my mind, and we just kind of gravitated towards creating that as a platform. Mm-hmm. So hopefully I wasn't too disparate there, but that's kind of
not at all. I think it's incredibly exciting to see how you're trying to build this into your business model, not in order to make more money, of course, but in order to sort of flesh out the ethos behind Albatross and so forth. So yeah, I'm hooked. If we could move to the idea of the natural contract itself, you'll remember, I'm sure everyone who's read the natural contract has one image in their mind, which is Goya's fight with cudgels, where you've got these two men slugging it out against each other, bashing each other with huge clubs, all the while sinking into the sand. That they're oblivious is swallowing them up. And of course, Michel Serres' point is that's a picture of our society. We're fighting each other. We're obsessed with social, economic issues, while the environment is eating us alive as it degrades gradually. Is that a view of our society that you share?
I do, absolutely. And I think, just this weekend, I was at a sailing regatta and talking to some people, and in the US, it's we used to be so powerful, and that might not be so true anymore. And China's on the rise and very powerful. And we were just talking about, we're still spending so much money and so many resources on kind of trying to check the Chinese government's power. And why aren't we just working together to do certain things that will really ensure we limit climate change as best as possible and things like this. So I absolutely do agree that that is happening.
Yeah. And one objection, the main objection that I've heard as I've been studying the natural contract, is that people say, well, it's just a stupid idea, because nature doesn't have a hand, it can't pick up a pen, it can't sign a contract. So what sense can it possibly make to talk about a natural contract? And I'd love you to respond to that in your own terms, in terms of the website. What do you mean by a natural contract? How can you have a contract with the natural world?
Right. So, I guess first, I totally fully assume I would be very happy if there were some sort of physical, tangible, natural contract that came about. That isn't my expectation necessarily, but I do think that this natural contract is more between people and the people of the world, and getting to the state where the people view almost this legal relationship of, this is how we need to treat the planet. And these are the limits that should be put on. I almost, in my mind, view it as kind of a property law, if you will, but just, expanded into certain things of the clean air is, some sort of right, property right, clean water, etc. So yeah, it's definitely, in my mind, I assume it may be an abstract concept. I would say my goal of the forum on naturalcontract.com really is almost a constitutional convention of sorts, where my hope is that I bring people together to discuss these ideas that should potentially be included in this idea of a contract, and to really just encourage discussion and encourage people to think about all of these issues in a new way, and hopefully that can manifest itself into tangible actions down the road or at the UN or wherever else.
Yeah, look, I'm excited to see where your website goes. Definitely, I've been on it and looking around, and there's some really interesting content on there already. People often put the question in terms of, why do we need a natural contract? I just want to flip that. I'm tired of that way of looking at it, and I want to ask you the opposite question. Why do you think? Why on earth haven't we had a natural contract before now? Because isn't it such an obvious thing to do? We rely on the natural world so fundamentally. If it degenerates, then so do we. There's nothing that is so fundamental to our continued survival and standard of living than an environment that is somewhat amenable to human life. So what is stopping us from generating something like a natural contract when you could argue it just seems so obvious this is something we should do?
Oh, you're totally right, and I definitely agree. I would say I feel many people I've talked to, and in disparate jobs, different roles around the world, I think we're really just as a one civilization starting to realize how much we can affect the planet, and quite frankly, I think many people realized how much we can affect the planet going back as far as the 60s and earlier potentially. But I think as a single populace, we're really just coming about, now it's the Anthropocene era, and I think we're starting to really understand this. But you're absolutely right. I mean, being an economist or studying economics in university, the tragedy of the commons was kind of one of those fundamental first lessons you learn about, and that's the issue we have at hand here. And I think there's so many issues that were hidden by corporations. Number one, just there's I won't get into the company names, not that I'm too afraid of them, but just there's like the issue of PCBs and PFAS and these forever chemicals where companies knew that pouring them into rivers was not going to be good for people or the animals, but they did it anyway. And so it would have been great if there was just this mental framework even within all the individual actors at these organizations, where they had this idea of their responsibility to the natural world and to the rest of civilization, quite frankly. So I think you're totally right. It's there should be a natural contract, without a doubt. And I think looking at it in this other way, as you just mentioned, is important. So
I think it is increasingly clear that it's an idea whose time has come, which is all the more remarkable, therefore, that Michel Serres wrote his book on the natural contract back in 1990.
I think about that all the time. Yeah, it's that was basically 1 year after I was born. So it's like, for me, I'm like, Michel Serres definitely on top of things. And yeah, I living out here in San Francisco now, I actually had a friend in the Stanford philosophy department and always wanted to meet Michel Serres, and unfortunately that's no longer possible. But yeah, just a remarkable mind, without a doubt.
Completely. So you're in San Francisco. I'm based over here in Melbourne. Two beautiful cities, two very urban environments. And I think if Michel Serres were part of this conversation, one point that he would pick up is you and I and him are part of a generation that is more insulated from the natural world, perhaps than any generation has ever been before. Now, for most of our lives, the only time we need to worry about the weather is whether we take an umbrella with us. We know we're not existentially relying on a day-to-day time frame on the climate. And therefore, I guess one objection that could be raised to the idea of a natural contract is why people like you and me should be the ones to write it. Aren't we the last people who should be getting our sort of hands dirty writing a natural contract? Isn't it rather the people who are more existentially reliant on climate, such as farmers and perhaps First Nations communities who have a more intimate relationship with the natural world? And how can your website take account, if you agree with that potential critique, how can the website take account of that sort of objection to the natural contract being led by people like you and me?
Yeah, well, that's a great point. And if you've been to our website, there's categories for discussion on it. And, my goal is to add categories as makes sense. And you're right, we should have something representing essentially, the significance of the natural world to indigenous populations. And I've recently read a lot about how indigenous stewardship of lands is seemingly so much more successful than when just typical government takes over, private company takes over. So I think that is a good point. At the same time, I think I'm largely driven just by action. And so, it's the old, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And I think, if we're at least thinking about these things and aware, I think it's, important to try to move at least the conversation in the direction we think it should be in. I think there's also the element of, realistically, industrialization is the greater cause of many of these threats. And so, well, I think indigenous communities are absolutely better equipped to handle, a certain stewardship of the land, and it's meaningful, and they observe changes at a different rate than we might living in a city. I think we might also be better equipped to reach out to the many companies here that are drilling for oil and supporting all of these other companies through their financial systems, et cetera, et cetera. But I think in general, every voice could have something important to contribute. And, the way I see the natural contract is my ultimate hope would be for it to just become a part of people as, their own mind frame, their own perspective, to have their own abstract framework to evaluate how their actions, affect the greater good and greater environment.
Yeah. And one thing that I really appreciate about the website is that you're not telling people what to think about the natural world. You're really just opening up a space where anyone who's interested and motivated can come along and contribute their questions or seek to engage with other people's questions. And therefore, I think that it really is a great pattern for allowing all these diverse voices, with very different skill sets to yours or to mine, to be able to come, and very different experiences to contribute to this debate. And you're, I guess, facilitating that rather than trying to drive that and tell people where it should be going. And so, yeah, I really appreciate the way that you've set up the website.
Glad to hear that. And yeah, I think that decentralization can be a good thing still.
Yeah. Let me raise another potential objection. You are selling shaving products. You're in the retail sector, and some people would say that sector is really the heart of the environmental problem at the moment. We're living under a system of shareholder capitalism, that there's a need for constant growth. There's the expectation of quarterly return on investment, so on and so forth. And until that is addressed, some people would say, the hope of forging something like a natural contract or dealing adequately with the climate crisis is going to be a pipe dream. So I just wanted to explore that a little bit with you. Do you see the retail sector in those terms? Do you see companies like your own as part of the solution? How do you sit within that sort of argument?
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely see, the greater retail sector and consumption as we know it as, a significant, major part of this problem. I guess when it comes to our own company, we see ourselves as part of the solution, or we hope to be part of a solution. Um, and that's just this, renewed form of capitalism. I think, in general, we do try to do everything as best as possible. And so a big part of our platform right now is we're against disposable plastics. And for example, we're coming out with a new aftershave and looking for the right types of bottles. And we even found the right type of aluminum lid that's recyclable. And then in every lid we found, there's actually like a plastic gasket. And it's the smallest detail, but we still haven't found the proper lids because we don't want to use that little bit of plastic. And so, maybe we're a bit intense. I know lots of other companies would say overall the footprint of our bottle is pretty minimal, and so that's okay. So, our company, we are trying to do things the right way, and I think overconsumption is a major issue affecting the greater environment. But at the end of the day, many people are still going to shave for cultural reasons, just feels better. I've had people come up to me and say, the most sustainable way to shave, don't do it at all. And it's a great point.
But then you need to buy products to maintain your beard.
Exactly. So it's kind of one of those things like how green can we make this act or behavior? Certainly greenwashing is rampant all over, and that's an issue. But again, I think too, if the more people become aware of all these little issues, the harder it is to greenwash certain products because you have a more educated consumer base.
Yeah.
It is a meaningful point, though. Absolutely.
And I think one of the exciting things that companies like yours are doing, who are really trying to do it properly and not just sort of throw up a green screen, so to speak, and bamboozle customers, is that in order for someone to go on the journey of buying one of your products, they have to do some thinking. And so it's also a collateral effect of people engaging with your products is that you are educating, you are changing people's view of the world, not in a didactic way, but simply in order to land on your website and move through it to purchase, some thinking has to happen, some consciousness raising has to happen. And perhaps that's another way in which you're not simply locked within this retail paradigm, you're also reaching beyond that. It is the way that I experienced your website anyway. And I thought, oh yeah, I'd never thought about the plastic in my razor before. And so there's all this stuff going on that's not on the balance sheet, and it's not in the factory, but it's still contributing to what Michel Serres would call our global intuition, our just sense of how things are, our sense of what's out there in the world, what's visible to us, what's valuable to us, and all of that is sort of just being drip fed. Again, not in a preachy way, but in order to buy one of your products, you've just got to do this thinking because it's right there in front of you on the website.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think, we're kind of in this greater movement of the zero waste movement. And, there's many people now where they really don't create trash. They maybe this much trash in a year. And that's awesome. I'm not as good as that, but I do my best to consider why are we using this just a disposable product, and the water bottle is the classic example, but there's so many other things, and I think that's really awesome to see. I think there's also just this systemic rigidities where most people aren't able to commit that hard, and so one thing we try to say is, there's a practical form of perfection, and it's about doing your best and thinking about these things and doing what you can. But sometimes you need to just go buy your kids ice cream at the neighborhood store and that's life. But I think, as more and more people become more aware, the system can slowly change, and hopefully one day we'll have, better solutions and a better system. And so that's kind of what we try to work towards.
That's the vision. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. One thing that we're doing in the Social Contract Research Network is we're monitoring Twitter on a sort of an hourly basis for tweets that mention the social contract. And one thing that's coming through, I think increasingly, in those tweets that are coming at the social contract from an ecological point of view, is an idea or a frustration that all the conventional ways of trying to address what's going on in the environment are failing. This is sort of the Extinction Rebellion line. We've tried negotiating with government, we've tried legal means, things like contracts, and they're not working. And so, these tweets are increasingly saying we just need to go down the civil disobedience route. And it struck me as the contract is a fundamentally traditional mechanism for trying to get things done. And I'm wondering what you think of that sort of idea that's saying, that the ship has sailed for things like contracts, that there's more aggressive and more immediate action needed at this stage where we are now.
Yeah, well, this triggered a thought in my own head where I think amongst my friends who are all in various areas of the sustainability movement, it's this big debate, like, can, good capitalism save us? Can a better form of capitalism save us? Or do we need government? Or does an individual's choice even matter? If one person stops shaving with plastic razors and doesn't even create any trash all year, does that even matter if these big global multinational companies are still drilling for oil? And obviously we'd love to see the government function where it should, and in some countries it does. Like, again, in the US right now, it's challenging, to say the least, in our opinion. But I personally do think that individual choices do matter, and if you have 1 billion individuals doing the right things, that is going to make a difference, and that is going to help to change the system. There's a quote, I forget who it was someone who used to work at the US State Department, talking about the fall of the Berlin Wall. And, they said it wasn't just one thing, it was many people doing many things, small things, all at once, all doing the right things. And that's ultimately what brought down the wall. And I think in this sustainability space, government does need to step in, but individuals are responsible. I used to love Sartre, and I think there's a great deal of importance in terms of individual responsibility. And so I think contracts still can be meaningful. I also have friends who went and protested the Dakota Access Pipeline, and ultimately they were successful in preventing, like, this pipeline from being built. So there's something there for civil disobedience, but I do think if we have the right politicians and right government officials, a contract in a proper government boost and push could be the quickest way ultimately to create the big system changes that we need. So I know that was a bit roundabout, but yeah, for me, I think a contract is still relevant. It's not the only part. Part of the reason why I started this green design company is I didn't have faith in government's ability to get there quick enough. And I felt at least we can get our small business there quick enough, and hopefully grow and inspire other companies and go from there. So it's an interesting setup, but I definitely believe that the world can be saved and we can limit the worst effects of climate change still. But yeah.
And I think fundamentally, as you say, it's not a either or situation, is it? There's I think, manifestly room for initiatives such as yours, trying to bring people together, trying to raise questions, get conversations going. And I wanted to, as we come into a final section now, just focus on the website and what you hope it can achieve and how it can achieve that. So for people who have not visited it, it's set up as a series of questions asked by anyone who wants to chip in, related to different aspects of the natural world. And then people can come in and dialogue on those questions. And, you know, that's valuable and important, but of course we all know that a website and a conversation like that won't in itself change the world. And so what's the vision for what happens with these conversations? How do you move from people identifying needs or problems in the natural world to something getting done, something changing?
Right. So this will be the interesting part, and there's certainly going to be a learning curve, but our goal now is for people to, you know, really engage on certain topics within certain categories on our site. And then once we feel a lot of good information and a lot of good ideas have been hatched out on a specific topic, then our plan is to have essentially a convention of sorts online. We're calling them community action meetings. And then ideally to get, you know, the best experts we can and the community as well, bring them together and then really try to hatch out specific tangible actions. And so, you know, those actions could be, here's the bill we propose for the state of California or the UN, right? I mean, however big, or it might take a fully different form. It might be, you know, one of the, we were talking about the water section, and it's not up right now, but just, it's been a major issue, lead and water in Americans' pipes, and this does intersect the whole natural contract, in my opinion at least, and things like this. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe a community action meeting actually ends up with water engineers spending a little time on this city's water infrastructure plan and things like that. So we're trying not to be too specific, but the goal is for dialogue to come about, to really, you know, engage a lot of people, have different ideas flowing. And then when it reaches a point where something tangible could be pulled out of those ideas, we then want to kind of host this community action meeting conference, if you will. And then from there, the purpose of that meeting is to actually lay out the tangible actions that can be taken from the participants of the meeting and, you know, others in the outside world. So that's kind of how we're going about it for now. It's definitely imperfect, and, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if it changes many times along the way. But my goal is to bridge a gap between, you know, the cheap talk of the online world and real tangible actions. So,
and wouldn't it be fantastic to see something like, you know, the next COP27 in Egypt in 2022 having discourse around the natural contract as a way of providing a framework within which people can think about these issues. I think that's one of the reasons that it's so powerful. The natural contract idea has something intuitive about it. We all sort of know how a social contract works, and we're all familiar with living inside it, and then to be able to transfer that to the natural world, I think, is building on something we've already got and we've already understand, and then trying to help us to understand something different with it. Yeah, look, if your website can sort of come across the desk of someone who's planning the COP in Egypt next year, and they can say, hey, that might be an interesting way of framing things, then who knows? Who knows?
Exactly.
If people are interested in the site, how can they get involved? What should they do? How can they spread the word?
Yes, you know, we just ask you really right now, I'm trying to create dialogue on the site. And so interestingly, we've had a lot more people sign up than have actually really posted. And it's kind of that, you know, initially you just have to get a momentum going. So I'd love for you to visit naturalcontract.com and sign up and ask any question, just post on anything. Our team is waiting to engage with you and answer questions and pull from our network to try to really get dialogue going on just so many really important issues. I think that's one last point I'd like to make, and it's there's so much attention on climate change specifically right now, and I think the problems that the environment faces, they're all interconnected, but a complete natural contract factors in other ideas besides just climate change. And climate change is absolutely part of the problem. But then there's ocean acidification, and the oceans are warming, and just the toxins that enter some water sources and air sources. And, the list is very long. But I think there's a lot of issues affecting the world right now, especially the natural world. And we're just trying to move people's mindsets towards solutions. So, and then finally, if people do want to help, there is a way to volunteer and contact us through thenaturalcontract.com. And it's pretty cool already. We've actually had a couple lawyers offer pro bono services, some more tech-minded folks. So really any and all skills are welcome.
Great. So whatever your expertise is, jump on. It's naturalcontract.com, isn't it? No, the on the front. Naturalcontract.com.
Either will work. The natural contract will redirect.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yep. Check it out. See what people are talking about. See how you can help. And Andrew, it's been wonderful having you on today. I'm just thrilled that someone is taking this idea from Michel Serres, this really powerful idea, this intuitive idea, and trying to run with it and trying to see how far it can take us in building community, in fostering public debate, in getting people with different skills together, and in seeing what we can do around this idea of a natural contract. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.